Okay, picture this. There was actually a proposal floated not too long ago that could have cut funding for the National Science Foundation by over 50%.
Wow, over half.
Yeah, more than half. Just think about that. The support for just a huge amount of science research potentially gone.
It really makes you wonder what was going on there
Right.
and, what the fallout could be or could have been.
Exactly. And that question is really the core of our deep dive today.
Hmm.
We've got this fascinating article in front of us called Scientists Are Leaving the U.S.
Right.
And our goal really is to unpack its main arguments, to get a handle on how U.S. science policy might have shifted under the Trump administration, and maybe more importantly, what the consequences could actually look like on the ground.
And it's important to note, this isn't just like one person's hot take.
No, definitely not.
The article looks at proposed budget changes, actual reactions from scientists, what they were saying, and even how the media covered it all. So it's trying to give a pretty rounded view.
Think of this as maybe your shortcut to getting up to speed on a pretty complicated situation. We've done the legwork, sifted through the details.
It's pulled out the key stuff.
Exactly. So you should come away with a much clearer idea of this potential shift, what might be driving it, and, what it could mean down the road. So let's just jump right in. Those proposed budget cuts.
The scale is really kind of breathtaking when you look at the 2017 proposals. The article highlights some major ones.
Like what?
Well, take the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. Huge engine for medical research, right?
Yeah, fundamental.
They were looking at a proposed cut of 37%.
37. That's not a trim. That's taking a massive slice out.
It really is. And the NIH wasn't the only one. The National Science Foundation, which, supports so much basic research across pretty much every field.
Physics, biology, computing.
All of it. They were facing potential cuts of over 50%.
50%. What does that even do to the science landscape, a cut like that?
Well, it sends a massive chill through the whole system. Fewer grants, obviously. Projects getting delayed, maybe stopped altogether. It just slows down discovery across the board.
Okay, so NIH, NSF. Who else?
NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, climate, weather monitoring,
Yeah,
super important stuff.
absolutely.
They were looking at a proposed 24% cut. And even NASA's science programs.
Oh, wow, even NASA.
Yeah, including the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope. And the article makes a point of saying this telescope was on schedule and under budget.
So not a troubled project they were trying to axe.
It doesn't seem like it. And still facing potential cuts of over 50% for those science programs.
It really paints a picture of maybe a broad stepping back from investing in science, doesn't it?
It does. And it wasn't just future plans either. The article mentioned something really immediate, the reported cancellation of $400 million
For what?
for existing federal research.
Yeah.
Cancer, Parkinson's,
Yeah.
diseases like that.
Hmm.
Money that was already supposed to be there.
Wow. So pulling back funds already committed. That feels, very disruptive.
Extremely. And then, adding to that instability, the NSF apparently stopped issuing new grants for a while.
Okay. So if you link all that, the huge proposed cuts, the canceled funding, the pause on new grants, back to this idea the article mentions, the brain drain.
Right. Skilled people leaving the country.
Yeah. You can totally see how that environment, that uncertainty could make scientists think twice about staying in the U.S., right?
Absolutely. Why stick around if the support for your work seems to be evaporating, or if you feel like your work isn't valued?
Which naturally brings us to the reaction from the scientists themselves. I mean, this level of change couldn't just happen in a vacuum.
No way. And the article highlights some pretty big responses, like leaders from both the NIH and the NSF actually resigning.
Really. Top people leaving.
Yeah. And apparently a key reason they cited was feeling censored. Like they weren't allowed to speak openly about what these policy shifts might mean.
That raises serious questions, doesn't it? About, the independence of science and whether researchers can speak freely.
It really does. And it wasn't just the leadership either. The article gives specific examples of well-known scientists who reportedly left or were seriously considering it.
Who are we talking about?
People like Danielle Beckman, a neuroscientist, Jason Stanley, he's a philosophy professor, and even David Baker, who's a Nobel Prize winner.
These aren't junior researchers looking for their first break. These are established names.
Exactly, which kind of speaks volumes about how unstable things might have felt at the time. Now, the article also mentions a survey in Nature
Okay.
that found around 34% of scientists were considering leaving the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
But it also makes a point to say some headlines blew that way out of proportion.
Oh, so.
Some reports apparently claimed it was more like three-quarters, which just wasn't accurate according to the survey data presented in the article.
Ah, okay. A good reminder to check the source, not just the headline.
Definitely. Context is key.
But still, 34%. That's over a third. That's a significant number.
It is. And the article argues that while scientists move around internationally all the time, that's normal.
Sure, for new opportunities, collaborations.
Right. But these conditions, the proposed cuts, the atmosphere, it seemed to be accelerating that trend, potentially turning normal movement into more of a, well, an intellectual exodus.
Okay, so that's the situation and the reaction. But then the article takes a bit of a turn, right? It starts looking critically at how we even measure the value of science funding.
Yeah, this part's really interesting. It brings up that statistic you sometimes hear.
The return on investment one.
Exactly. That for every dollar invested in the NIH, you get something like, what, $246 back in economic activity?
Yeah, I've heard that used a lot to justify funding, shows direct economic benefit.
Right. But the article pushes back on that a bit.
How?
It argues that, okay, that number reflects money being spent buying lab gear, paying salaries, economic activity happening around the research. But it doesn't necessarily tell you if the research itself is actually leading to major public benefits or, truly groundbreaking discoveries.
Okay, I see. So it's like judging how good a restaurant is just by how much money people spend there, not by whether the food was any good.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Exactly. It measures the churn, not necessarily the outcome or the quality.
So the article is suggesting that these budget cuts, as bad as they seemed, might have unintentionally forced a rethink about how we measure scientific impact. Maybe we've focused too much on just the dollars flowing around.
Precisely. It even touches on how funding sometimes gets pulled towards whatever's trendy.
The hot topic of the moment.
Yeah. Which can mean maybe over-investing there and neglecting other areas that might pay off big time later. So this kind of disruption, even if unwelcome, could maybe push for a more critical look at where the money goes and why.
Huh. So is the article saying there's actually an upside to all this?
Well, it acknowledges a potential unintended consequence. It suggests that if the total number of scientific papers published in the U.S. were to fall,
Which seems likely with less funding.
right, that could potentially lead to more focus on the quality and rigor of the research that is getting published, rather than just churning out lots of papers.
The publish or perish pressure.
Exactly. That pressure can sometimes incentivize quantity over, truly significant work. So maybe, just maybe, a shift towards valuing deeper, more impactful findings could lead to healthier science in the long run.
It's an interesting thought, a potential silver lining maybe, but perhaps a faint one given everything else.
Definitely faint. And the article doesn't gloss over the main worry, which was about the way these cuts were being proposed.
What do you mean?
The concern raised in the article is that the cuts didn't seem based on, like, a careful evaluation of programs or a strategic plan.
Oh, more.
More like they were driven by ideology or just targeting programs that were disliked for other reasons rather than a thought-out science policy. And that kind of arbitrary decision-making is risky for the whole scientific enterprise.
Right. And one last point the article makes is about the media coverage, isn't it?
Yeah, just briefly. It observes that these potential major shifts in science policy reportedly didn't get a ton of coverage in some right-leaning media outlets.
Interesting.
And the article uses that observation to mention the value of tools like ground news.
Ah, the platform that shows you news coverage from different perspectives.
Exactly. The idea being it helps you, the listener, see the bigger picture, spot potential blind spots in where you usually get your news.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's try and pull this all together. What are the main things you should take away from this deep dive into the scientists are leaving the U.S. article?
Okay, first big one. The article really hammers home that science policy under the Trump administration wasn't just about small tweaks. It was significantly defined by these very large proposed budget cuts across many key science agencies.
Right, the scale was huge. And
Second, the integrity of science itself felt threatened, according to the article, because of reported restrictions on scientists being able to speak freely about their work and, the implications of these policies. Censorship concerns.
got it. And third, while scientists moving around is normal,
Yeah, global science is mobile.
the article flagged serious worries about an accelerated brain drain, people potentially leaving the U.S. specifically because of the instability and maybe feeling undervalued.
Then fourth, it really challenges us to think about how we measure success in science, that common ROI metric. Maybe it doesn't capture the real public benefit or the actual importance of the discoveries being made. It's more about the spending around it.
Okay. And lastly,
Lastly, a bit of nuance. Even policies that seem damaging on the surface can sometimes, unintentionally, prompt a useful re-examination of how things are usually done, maybe leading to some beneficial shifts in focus, like quality over quantity, even if that wasn't the plan.
right, so it's a complex picture with lots of interacting factors.
Definitely. Which leads us to a final thought for you to mull over. If there is this potential shift maybe sparked by these events, away from just counting publications towards focusing more on the quality and impact of research, how might that fundamentally change the way we evaluate scientific progress? And maybe more importantly, how might it change science's actual influence on our lives in the coming years?
That's definitely something to think about. How do we measure what really matters in science?